Let's talk first about the immediate task at hand, because we all know just across the border, the 17.5 million people of Shenzhen are in lockdown now. What direct impact is Hong Kong seeing as a result of the supply chain across the border? At a time, there's been panic buying here. I've been to the grocery store. The shelves are still empty of fresh vegetables in my local grocery store, and empty shelves to some people equates to empty promises from the government. Your response?
I see. Well, good morning, Steve. Basically, before Shenzhen is going to conduct its multiple round of universal testing, we have communicated and make sure that the supplies of foodstuff and other necessity will be uninterrupted and will be available to Hong Kong. And so far, the situation has been very stable. The provision of fresh produce, daily necessities, and all essential stuff are made available in Hong Kong, as you can see.
What are you doing now that we've kind of have revisionist thinking now, because Hong Kong, by most accounts, was kind of caught flat-footed with this fifth wave. We didn't know that it was going to become this bad, with this many deaths, with this many cases, and this many challenges to the whole logistics supply chain and everything. How did, from your vantage point, how did Hong Kong get in this situation? How were you so ill prepared, and what are you going to do to prevent it if there happens to be, God forbid, another big wave?
Oh, when we are talking about logistics, then let's tell you more about what we have done in the past few weeks at least. We understand that the pandemic is raging across the globe, and Hong Kong is coming into its fifth wave. But at the same time, we are working very hard to tackle the epidemic situation in Hong Kong. And we, together with everyone in Hong Kong, are fighting the virus. And in terms of daily necessities and foodstuff, we have been working very closely with Shenzhen and Guangdong counterparts to make sure that the supplies are stable, abundant. And as you can see, we have not only reinforced the land transportation for these foodstuff and daily necessities, we have set up, regular shuttles. Well, what I mean is marine and water shuttles from mainland to Hong Kong. And so far, the supply has been astonishing. Well, in the past few weeks, we are talking about over 500,000 tons of stuff are being transported by water to Hong Kong. And also, we have restarted the railway link from Shenzhen to Hong Kong to make sure that the anti-epidemic medicines, personal protective equipment, and other anti-epidemic stuff like rapid antigen tests are all made available in Hong Kong in very prompt response on request of Hong Kong.
So what you're saying is the lockdown in Shenzhen, which will last till March 20th, is not going to materially impact the supply chain to Hong Kong. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yes, we do have a working group. We have a task force on supplies from the mainland, which has been working 24 hours a day. And then with a multi-level dialogue and discussions and liaisons. And so far, it has been working very well. As you can see, from Monday until today, everything is going on fine in Hong Kong. Of course, we are also supporting our counterpart in the mainland to fight the virus, because the number of infected cases in Hong Kong is rather high, and therefore we have put into practice a slight pre-departure rapid antigen test before the cross-boundary goods vehicle drivers are going across the boundary into Shenzhen. And we have been taking every measures to protect not only Hong Kong, but also our people across the boundary.
Secretary Chan, I do need to ask about the flight ban, because we all know, and everybody who's watching this, who's in Hong Kong, needs to know what is the government's plan and what is the exit strategy. April 20th is the date that the flight ban for those 9 countries has been extended to. There are lots of people who are stuck, cannot come back into the city. Can you tell me right now, based on the data and the trajectory of the virus, and also the vaccination rate, which is above 90% now for the first shot, and the second shot will be above 90% by the time April 20th comes around in 35 days from now, is all the data indications show you that we can lift that flight ban?
As we all know, the Omicron is very infectious. The transmissibility is very high, and the number of confirmed cases in Hong Kong is very high as well. And therefore, we have to do whatever we can to curb the spread and also to keep the number of confirmed cases, serious cases, and fatality down. And it's what we need to do to protect the health and well-being of Hong Kong people, and so that we would be in a position to reopen. As far as we can see as of today, we are unable to tell how the epidemic would develop. And that's why we are taking a very careful and prudent step to make sure that we protect the people first and foremost in Hong Kong, make sure that the spread is being curbed, and then we are in a position to decide on the next step forward. And as far as aviation sector is concerned, we have been maintaining very close liaison and watch with the sector, and we will do whatever we can to protect the aviation sector as much as we can, because a pause now is meant for recovery for the future. So let's focus not only on today, but also on the way forward.
Well, people have to plan. At what point does a decision have to be made on the lifting of that ban? Look, let's just be honest here. Let's look at the numbers. I mean, Hong Kong right now has the highest death rate, the highest rate of infection per capita in the world, far more than those 9 countries. Are you not committed to necessarily saying that April 20th is a date that you can open up if the virus subsides?
I think that the decision would have to be made in totality by the health authority, because the kind of quarantine requirement are basically required to protect the health and safety of Hong Kong. And therefore, we would take into account the health consideration, as well as economic and other global connection. And it has to be a kind of a decision to be made in totality. We just can't make a decision solely on the number of infected cases or a comparison between the epidemic situation in other countries and Hong Kong.
I'll frame the question a little softer then. Are you more optimistic or more pessimistic that in 35 days from now, those restrictions on 9 countries potentially could be lifted? It's more a case of the situation in Hong Kong, not an external virus situation, right?
Yeah, Steve, I thank you for you softening up your question. But I must say I am an optimistic person, but nonetheless, we have to make decisions based on facts and figures and scientific reasoning. And therefore, I wouldn't commit myself for such a rather rash kind of advice, Let us tell you when the time is right, I would say.
All right. Well, let's talk about Cathay Pacific. You are on the Airport Authority. You are, of course, the Transportation Secretary here. It's been a rough 2 years, as you know, for Cathay Pacific. They're down to 2% of their pre-pandemic passenger capacity. They are burning through cash, where even the executives are saying by mid-next year, their treasure trove of cash will be whittled down to zero. How long can zero COVID how long can Cathay last under these zero COVID restrictions?
Well, I would say that it will last because we have been attaching great importance to the aviation sector in Hong Kong. We are upholding our position as the international aviation hub, and we are preparing for the recovery, because we are now developing very well in terms of the construction of the free one-way system. In actual fact, is the construction of a new airport in equivalent. And therefore, by the time when the world is recovering altogether, Hong Kong will be in a very privileged position to launch, because by then we have the free one-way system. That means we have a cargo handling capacity nearly double, from 5 million tons of cargoes per year to 10 million tons of cargo per year, and from 75 million of passenger trips per year to over 100 million passenger trips per year. That's the capacity we are going to build, or we are building, and therefore we are optimistic that when the global economy after the pandemic is over, Hong Kong would be well equipped to launch.
Well, there was, a few months ago, Carrie Lam had talked about possibly launching legal fight against Cathay Pacific. Is that something still in the works? And does it make much sense, given the fact that your government has quite a sizable stake in the airline? Can you update us on that?
Oh, I see. The shareholding and legal proceeding are two different things. Because Hong Kong is a place, one of its core values is the rule of law, and therefore, if there's anything that is criminal or a violation of the law, then we have to take actions. But as far as the investigation is still undergoing, and prosecution has been initiated for some of the crew members, it would not be appropriate for us to discuss the case, on open air.
Well, I'm just curious, does the government generally, the sentiment feel that Cathay is responsible for this fifth wave because of breaches to its COVID protocols? Or has it gotten much bigger than that?
Well, I would say that I wouldn't comment, this particular subject, openly, because it has a kind of implication on what is being investigated and what is going to be heard in the court. And therefore, I would suggest, Steve, that we just stay away from this for the time being. Well, if there's any occasion in the future when the dust settles, then we might talk again.
You're also the housing secretary. Can you give me an indication of what your projections tell you about the dip in housing prices? We're already seeing in Tongchong, which is near the airport, Centerline says prices have already dipped 5% since the Lunar New Year holiday. We've all seen the headlines about, bookings out of this city are up 300%. 70% of those tickets are one way, according to one news source. There is an exodus going on here. What is going to be the damage to the housing market here and prices here from the exodus and from these zero COVID policies, which has no end in sight?
I see. Well, Steve, we have been keeping an eye on the air traffic every day. Indeed, the number who is traveling away from Hong Kong is larger than the number of people coming in. But as you had just mentioned, it's the quarantine requirement that stop people from coming into Hong Kong. Therefore, a sheer comparison between the figures from going out and coming in would be rather misleading, I would say. Of course, I won't argue whether or not these people are actually leaving Hong Kong, or whether they're leaving Hong Kong for a while and then come back later. But as to property prices, it will be very difficult to predict, because we have to look at the global economy altogether. While the pandemic is raging across the globe, every country, every city is being affected. And it's very difficult to judge at such a turbulent time to say how the property market of Hong Kong is going. And therefore, I would say that, well, let's take a bit of time. When the epidemic subsides and when the economy recovers, then that's the best time to speculate, or perhaps, or to guess how the Hong Kong property market is going. Making a judgment or a guess nowadays would be very risky, I would say, and it's not going to be scientific. I would propose.
Fair enough. I have a last question for you, just on an opening up question. Could you give me an indication what benchmarks the government is working on as far as vaccination rate and number of daily infections and so forth that would be classified in government estimations as the virus subsiding? It's not going to go to zero. We're not going to go to zero. What are the benchmarks for business, for people to plan on when we can assume Hong Kong will reopen?
Okay. Well, perhaps I can share with you the kind of anti-epidemic strategy in Hong Kong. The first is the free early intervention. The very first intervention is early identification, early isolation, and also early treatment. And then followed by, we need to reduce the number of confirmed cases, the number of serious cases, and the fatality. And if we could achieve all these three, kind of a reduction, then we would be in a position to consider reopening. But before that, we have to be very cautious, because Omicron is regarded as highly transmissible, and despite the fact of the kind of seriousness of the virus, but then we have to look at the overall health and well-being of Hong Kong people first, because life is most important. Without life, there's nothing valuable, okay? And therefore, the very first and foremost thing that we have to protect Hong Kong people from harm. And therefore, when the epidemic is coming down, when the number of confirmed cases is coming down, and the number of serious cases and fatalities is coming down, then we would be in a position to consider reopening. I think that's the basic kind of philosophy and strategy we are taking for the time being.